Welcome to the SEC Championship Preview Show presented by T-Mobile. I'm Skubie Mageza, here to guide you through what is the SEC Championship and get you to know everything that comes along with it. And I am joined by Harry Lyles, who has boots down in the A. Harry, bro, how you doing, man? Appreciate you for locking in with your boy for this fun time.
Hey, no doubt, man. And you know, it's always easier on the work week when you get to spend the game at home. You know what I mean? So no complaints over here. And we're getting the matchup that we all, I don't want to say wanted at the beginning of the season, right? But it's hard to envision a better matchup than this one, Alabama versus Georgia.
Yeah, we got an action-packed show. A lot to talk about with this matchup. As a matter of fact, in terms of all the conference championship games, this one, according to our ESPN analytics, is the closest in terms of which team has the highest projection to win it. Now, we have a number of fun guests joining the show. We got Elle, Duncan joining the show, and we also have singer, songwriter, and football fan Darius Rucker to join the show to talk about the big game and multiple things as well. So let's just jump right into the matchup, man. These two teams both coming off wins to end the season, but I don't think any is more impressive than what Alabama was able to do in those final seconds, or maybe it wasn't impressive since Jalen Milroe threw the ball ahead of the line, literally plays a 4, and it was 4th and a mile.
Hey, it's all about the one that everybody remembers, right? He got the one that he needed to get right. So we'll give him credit for that.
So coming into this game, man, Milroe seemed like he was feeling himself. I don't know if you saw the clip of him screaming that he needs to give me the Heisman, man. Give me that up. Can't say it over here. I've been saying that on every show, but that is what he says. Do you think the momentum is with the Tide at this moment?
I think it is. Even with the close call, look, we all know in rivalry games, anything can happen, no matter how bad or good one side or the other might be in a given year. But if you're this Alabama team, this is the weekend that you have been waiting for since the Texas game. This was your safety blanket. And that's not even to say that Texas game was a bad loss by any means, because it's not. Obviously, that team is still very much in the playoff hunt. However, I do think the one thing that you have to consider with this game is this is something that Alabama has been hoping for since the jump, not just because of that game in particular, but I think a lot of people forget how things were looking 3 quarters through that USF game when we were tied 3-3, when they had benched Jalen Milroe. And you saw that leadership from him in that game when he was not on the field. He was one of the first people to go congratulate his teammates when things were going well, things like that. And so now you've arrived at this place where now he's gotten those game reps that he didn't have leading up to the Texas game. And now this team looks like they are extremely well equipped to handle a Georgia team that has won 29 in a row.
Yeah, and to your point, in terms of that leadership that Jalen Milroe showed, Nick Saban spoke on it, and the whole week how Jalen had to handle it. Obviously, it was tough for him. He said he didn't like to hear the news that he was being benched, but when it came down to game day, he was a leader, and it was clear that the guys in that locker room were ready to follow Jalen Milroe. Now, do you think this team is the same that they were in week 2? Because right now, everyone continues to bring up that Texas game. And if you're an Alabama fan, you're almost saying you keep disrespecting us for that loss, because let's remember that Alabama was up going into the 4th quarter of that game. And Jalen Milroe is most definitely not the same person that he was in that game. So are they being disrespected for that game in week 2? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know that I would label it as disrespect. I do think, there's one thing. I did a story earlier this season on Charlie Ward and his Heisman season in 1993. And one of the things that he told me helped him become the player that he was the game reps. Early on, a lot of people forget, during his junior season at quarterback, Charlie Ward and that Florida State team struggled mightily. And it was not until the end of the season until things started catching on. And I have said this anywhere on any ESPN platform since that football game. If Texas and Alabama played even just a few weeks later, I think Alabama probably would have won that game because Jalen Milroe would have had real game reps. And that's not to take anything away from Texas. They're still a great team, but that stuff really does matter. And obviously we've seen it with him, right? I mean, he's looked like a completely different player, especially the last 4 weeks.
So true. And let's remember, like, the first 8 games of the season, Jalen Milroe was sacked, I think, about 35 times, the most in the SEC. And in the last 4 games, he's only been sacked 4 times. I don't think we've ever seen a player improve and develop the way that Jalen Milroe has mid-season this year. Typically, you see that type of development when a player goes from year one to year two or something. But for Jalen Milroe, he was able to develop in the middle of the season. And I think that's a testament to Nick Saban, most definitely, and Tommy Rees being able to figure out, okay, this is what works best with Jalen Milroe. Hey, let's start to use his legs more. Let's start to get on the same page as an offensive line, because coming into the year, Alabama was seen as a team that was going to run the ball more. They were going to go back to that 2013 year where they're just beating people up, able to beat you in the trenches. However, the offensive line wasn't necessarily performing towards that level. We've talked so much about Alabama. I think it's time we dive a little bit into Georgia. How do you feel about the way that they closed the season, especially when they lost their best player on the team, Brock Bowers? And mind you, for those who didn't know, he didn't play against Georgia Tech, but I would expect him to play in the SEC championship.
Yeah, I do think we'll probably see him in this game. It was a situational thing. Kirby Smart had said that had they absolutely needed him, he would have been able to be available. But it was one of those things, you're trying to preserve guys for when you really need them, because this is certainly the game with the most stakes, right? But when you do talk about this Georgia team, obviously, when those first playoff rankings came out and they were not number one, a lot of people were, up in arms about it and concerned. Hey, are they going to get there? Things like that. And you kept telling folks, hey, man, just look down the schedule, right? You've got Missouri, you've got Tennessee, you've got Ole Miss. And if they take care of business in those games, they will be number one by the end of it. And I think they were number one after the second one of those three games. Because they kept showing, obviously, they I don't want to say struggled with Missouri. I think Missouri is a very good football team and one, honestly, that has not gotten enough due.
Yep.
Yeah. But when you finally see what they do against Ole Miss, you win that game 52-17 against what was then the number 9 team in the college football playoff rankings. I think they were number 10 today. And especially what they did against Tennessee and stopping their running game, which has been one of the best in the country. This Georgia team has just showed you, man, for as much as this season that they have played down to their competition, they have been just as good, if not better, at playing up to their competition as well. And Skubie, you talk about Jalen Milroe's improvement over the season. Carson Beck, to me, has also been one of the most improved players in college football. I mean, he's been making throw after pro throw in these games, making great passes. To your point as well, with Brock Bowers being out, with Ladd McConkey being out. So this Georgia team, man, it doesn't have the sexy of the last couple of years, but they are still very clearly the best team in college football.
Hey, man, I would say they got a little sexy to them. And I only say that because typically what we've seen in the past is the Georgia defense being the elite side of the ball. However, this year, it's the offensive side of the ball that is the elite part of this team. And to me, that's sexy because, we want to see some points scored, if you feel me, Harry. But at the end of the day, what I've seen with this Georgia team, and I had to get this down, is Carson Beck has not been pressured. The reason why he's been able to be so effective in the passing game, dude's only been sacked 10 times all season. That's 8 fewer than any other team in the SEC. There was one game, I think it might have been the Tennessee or the Missouri game, where he was pressured 7% of his passes over the whole season. He's only been pressured 22% of his dropbacks. So my question to you, man, is this team more scary on the offensive side, or do you think they're more scary on the defensive side?
Man, it's tough to say because when they are at full health offensively, obviously with Brock Bowers, and I think a lot of people have seen in the last few weeks when Ladd McConkey is back. I mean, he really is a technician with the route running. I mean, makes guys look silly every single season, And then when their running game is on, right? Like we saw that from Kendall Milton last week against Georgia Tech. He absolutely popped off and showed the potential that a lot of people had felt he has had, right? With Georgia, you think of all the great running backs that have come through, the Noshawn Marinos, the Nick Chubbs. But I still say, though, man, it's hard for me not to say the defense isn't their strong suit just because of Kirby Smart and that pedigree, and just because some of the guys that they got back there, whether it's Bullard or Lassiter in the defensive backfield, that line and the pressure that they're able to get on guys, that to me, there's just nothing more menacing than a great defense. And despite putting basically the Philadelphia Eagles together the last 2 years, this Georgia defense is still an absolute problem. And it's going to be a great matchup for this Alabama offense, against this Alabama offense, I should say.
So we've talked about how good they is and all that. So where's their weakness? Where can you attack this Georgia team? Where's their Achilles heel? Let the people know.
So here's my thing. To me, it is less about the weakness of Georgia, which offensively, okay, maybe it is if you have the injuries at receiver, right? Or in the case of, let's just say pass catchers, right? We'll include Brock Bowers in there. Is a Ra Thomas going to step up, which I think he might be one of the guys that's actually hurt? Is Dominic Lovett going to have one of his better games? And if they don't, is the running game going to step up? So I think sometimes that uncertainty on the Georgia offense could be an issue, but to me, it's not one that would keep them up at night by any means, because as we've seen, especially over the last month, they're clicking on all cylinders, right? Defensively, I think the one thing that they have to be concerned with isn't really anything in their control necessarily. It's, can you stop the big plays from Jalen Milroe? Ever since he got back into that full-time starting role, I think he's had accounted for 54 plays of at least 20-plus yards.
He was more efficient throwing the deep ball than he was the intermediate short passes.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is an Alabama offense that creates big plays, and he can do it with his arm or he can do it with his legs. So to me, rather necessarily than a perceived weakness of Georgia's, it's really, can you stop those big plays? Because not only does that obviously help your defense to prevent those, but I will say, even though this is in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, this is in Atlanta, Alabama fans travel well, man. This is not something that they are not accustomed to, right? Like, this could be their 9th SEC championship, right? Like, they do this. So you got to avoid those big plays. One, just because you don't want to allow them to get those games, but two, you also want to keep this crowd out of it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said at the top of the show, you got boots on the floor down in the A. Maybe, have you seen some Alabama jerseys moving around already? Because if they travel well, they better get up there, get there early and get in. All right, so we're going to have a lot more on this Bama and Georgia matchup. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we got Elle Duncan joining the show, and she's a huge Bulldogs fan. So here's what she had to say about the matchup.
This has been a very interesting time for me because I have tried to grow over the last couple of years as a Georgia fan. I have tried to ask myself if I deserve the fortune that I've had, because for my whole entire life, Georgia never won a national championship. And that was my whole grift. Like, woe is us. We're pathetic. We can never win the big one. This is so sad. And then we finally win. We exercise the demons. We beat Alabama in the national championship. We get our natty, and I promised I would never ask for another nice thing in the world. And then we win for a second straight year, and we're on the precipice of 30 straight wins and winning 3 straight natties, something that nobody's done since they were using actual pig skin on the footballs. And I promised myself I would have no expectation and put no expectation on these men. And that has been incredibly difficult to do, especially over the last few weeks when it became evident we'd be facing Alabama in the SEC championship. I am not giving this to you, Crimson Tide fans, that you have real estate in my head. You do a little bit. But what I have come to the conclusion at lately is that instead of thinking about all of the ways this could go wrong, is leaning into the idea that Kirby Smart told us years ago when he came back to this program that he wanted to build a dynastic program, that he wanted to be the Georgia way. And I am putting faith and confidence that he has done exactly that. Despite the pressure that fans like me are putting on this team, there is no pressure. Truly. And I know what you're saying. You're like, yeah, right, Elle. Things that you tell yourself to make yourself feel better, but there's not. Nobody's done this before. The idea that Alabama still haunts our dreams, I would like to believe that we proved 2 years ago that is no longer the truth. And more importantly, I believe in poetic justice, in the idea that we haven't lost a game in almost 2 years, and that the team that we last lost to is Alabama, that being the same team that yet again could derail our chances of making history. I believe in poetic justice, and I believe that we are going to win. And more importantly, the reason I'm confident about what Georgia's going to do in Atlanta on Saturday, despite the fact that Alabama is perfect at the Mercedes-Benz Dome and also keeps beating us at SEC championships, is because we've got an X factor, and his name is Kirby Smart. And have you ever heard this man in pregame speeches? Have you ever heard this man in halftime speeches? In the great words of Kirby Smart, this ain't hard. So if you're going to do this, and I know that you can, you got to do it. Ain't no reason to be nervous about it. You beat their ass on special teams, you beat their ass on defense, and then you walk away with the win. This ain't hard. This is Georgia football. So do it on Saturday. Let's close this damn deal. Let's put this aside once and for all. We're the better team. We don't fear Bama, and we're coming for that third straight title. Let's go. Ho, ho.
All right, a lot of cussing, and clearly Elle has no bias when it comes down to this game. She's going with them dogs. What a walk-off by her. But you're watching the SEC Championship Preview Show presented by T-Mobile, and we're going to continue this conversation between these two teams, specifically on Alabama being able to attack Carson Beck and this Georgia offense. How are we going to be able to do that if you're Nick Saban preaching to your team before this game, Harry?
Hey, look, you go to 41 and you go to 15, Chris Braswell and Dallas Turner, and you say, go do what you've been doing all season. I think they've got to combine something like 30 tackles for loss, right? So, I mean, like, they're going to get pressure on Carson Beck. The thing that you have to hope for is that you get hands on him. Like, he as you mentioned before, he hasn't really faced a ton of pressure during this season. And if they're going to have guys that are banged up on the offense, this is your opportunity to take advantage of that. These guys put a ton of pressure on him. And mind you, when you do that, it's really not even just about the pressure. It's what the pressure helps create. That pressure helps create opportunities for this defensive backfield. Terrion Arnold's got 5 interceptions this year. We all know about Kool-Aid McKinstry. Like, this defensive backfield on Alabama has 4 guys that, depending on how their careers go, they can all be first-round NFL players, right? Which, surprise, Alabama's got dudes that are going to go to the league, right? But it all starts with that pressure, man.
Yeah, that is such a fact. Carson Beck is going to be seeing a different breeds on the defensive side of the ball. And it's coming off the back end of a game where he kind of played his I don't want to say worst, but just not his best performance of the entire season. Beck threw for a season low 175 yards against Georgia Tech. The only time this season he's been held under 250 yards of passing. So if you have the GOAT such as Nick Saban, who just knows how to scheme defensively, he's going to be looking at that Georgia Tech tape. Now, what Georgia was able to do was just feed the beast, and Kendall Minton, he was able to run for a career high 156 yards in Georgia's win versus Georgia Tech. And when I think back to that game, man, it was close. Georgia Tech missed that field goal right before halftime to get things a little bit more in shouting distance. So I don't expect Alabama to make those same mistakes. And once again, I'm just going to keep hammering down on the fact that if you can find a way to get Carson Beck uncomfortable, he hasn't felt pressure in his face at a high level. Now, the thing about Beck is he has elite arm talent. The dude can sling that thing, you feel me? But we haven't really seen him create with his legs, improvising, right? To the level that some of these guys do, like your Bryce Young, your Caleb Williams, even your Bo Nix, guys who have been up for the Heisman. And when you look at those guys who've thrown for 250 plus yards pretty much every single game in the season, they were in Heisman contention. I think Carson Beck needs a little bit more credit when it comes down to what he's been able to do for this team. But if you attack him and make sure you just force him to try and use his legs more and improvise, it's going to be something that he isn't comfortable doing, right? Because we haven't seen that as much from him this season.
No, for sure. And I will say, it's interesting. One of the things before the season actually started, I was at the Georgia spring game. And after that, they were asking Kirby Smart about, the quarterback competition at the time, which I think most people obviously believed what we've seen up to this point, which is that Carson Beck was going to become the starter because he had the most reps, in practice, things of that nature. And the one thing that they have always preached is, they feel like they go up against the best all the time in practice. So as far as they're concerned, or at least what they're going to project out there, is they're going to tell you, hey, like, he sees this in practice. all the time. However, I do think it's a little bit different, though, when there's an SEC championship on the line, when there's a college football playoff spot on the line, and those guys might actually really kind of want to be headhunting a little bit more. So, we'll see if that actually matches up on Saturday.
Yeah, when the jersey you have on in the game is actually allowed to be hit, it hit different, literally.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of the Bama side, they have some injuries on offense, and we're still yet to find out about that. What are they looking forward to, and how can what should they hope to be able to do in this game, and what injuries are they dealing with?
Yeah, obviously the big one, Jace McClellan, their running back. He's been their leading rusher this season. You really need him in this game against this Georgia defense. Obviously the run always opens up the pass. And one of the things that every single college football coach will tell you, the biggest statement rather, that you could make as a football team is being able to run the football well. That's something that Georgia has always been able to do. That's something that Alabama has always been able to do. So if Jace McClellan's not able to go, that's going to be an issue, because this Alabama backfield is not the type that, the depth that we've seen in the past, right? Where you've got Kenyon Drake, Alvin Kamara, Tyron Jones, TJ Yeldon, all these different guys in one backfield. Like, this is not that, But with that said, I still think, because of what we've seen out of Jalen Milroe, both throwing and on the ground, 15 touchdowns accounted for, just one turnover the last 4 games, it still could be enough, right? Like, you've still got enough playmakers. You've got Jermaine Burton out wide, and he knows this Georgia team. He transferred over 2 years ago, right? So they've still got guys, Isaiah Bond, another really good receiver, like Alabama's still got talent behind talent. There's only 5 college football teams that can do that nowadays, obviously, with the transfer portal. But I think still, you just really, if you're Alabama, you've got to hope that you have the Jalen Milroe that you've seen the last 4 weeks. And I think you will, right? Obviously, and for as tough as a game as last week was for them in the Iron Bowl, and how close that was they were to losing in this game, I don't want to say not mattering, but pretty close, right, Skubie? I mean, the stakes are a lot different when you come into this one, and if you win it, you might get in the playoff, and they still might not. But I think having that confidence is a big deal. Like, I genuinely do think, you saw it and you mentioned it earlier about, Jalen Milroe railing about give me the Heisman. Like, he might be wrong, but he's also right in the sense that, hey, that confidence is something you're going to need when you're going up against a team that hasn't lost in 2 years, right? So I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, and Alabama undefeated against Georgia in the SEC championship. And Harry, I don't know if you noticed, though, Jalen Milroe became a different player once he put the sleeve on. You feel me?
For
like,
sure.
Jalen Milroe with the sleeve is like LeBron with the headband. It came out of nowhere.
Yeah, man. I mean, you got to have some flavor to it, right? Like, everybody's got their thing. Every superhero's got their own cape, right?
Yeah, for sure, man. Now this matchup, we won't dive too deep into this because there's so much that needs to happen. But let's just say Alabama beats Georgia in a close matchup, and I emphasize close matchup. Do we not have Georgia make it in the SEC into the college football playoff, or do you see both of them getting in? Like, does Alabama need help? Does Georgia need help? How do you see that shaping out?
It's tough for a number of reasons. First off, we have 3 one-loss teams right now, one of them obviously being Alabama, that are really deserving. I personally feel like Oregon's been one of the 4 best football teams in the country the last 6 or so weeks. Honestly, like, they should have beaten Washington. I think they'll get their revenge on Friday here. But if Florida State beats Louisville, like, are you going to keep out an undefeated Florida State? Like, I don't think you could do that, right? Because at the end of the day, the results on the field have to matter. You're not going to keep out an undefeated ACC champion. However, that also does seem like just a mind-boggling thing, because are you going to keep out a Georgia team who lost in the conference championship game, to your point, in a close game? So it's going to be a chaos scenario, I feel like, no matter what. And I am just glad that I am not on the committee.
Fact. I tell people this all the time. I don't necessarily have a team that I root for. What I root for is chaos. So whoever chaos is, and wherever you be, do your thing, please. We need complete and utter chaos. Well, Harry, we got a lot more to come up on this Alabama and Georgia matchup with our predictions. But earlier today, I spoke with singer and songwriter Darius Rucker, who is also a huge college football fan. And we talked everything SEC football and his music. Check it out. Joining us now is Darius Rucker, and thanks to the T-Mobile Championship Concert, you can watch Darius live on Saturday, December 2nd at 12 p.m. at the SEC Fanfare in Atlanta, Georgia, and you can also watch him live on Marty and McGee on the SEC Network. Darius, really appreciate you joining us, and I'm not sure if everybody knows about your football fandom, so tell me about your fandom with the SEC and your South Carolina fandom.
Oh, I've been a South Carolina fan, goodness, as long as I can remember. I guess we were independent when I was there in '84, and then we joined the SEC, and we've been fighting our way through ever since.
This game this year is going to be big. Everyone's talking about the fact that if Alabama beats Georgia, maybe Georgia doesn't make it in. Bama has to beat Georgia to get in, obviously, with their one loss. So tell me about the game and what you think about the job that Saban has done with this team that looked like they were on the downward trend.
Yeah, after the Texas loss, I was like, maybe this is not going to be Alabama's year. But then, of course, they run the table from there. And I think they're great. I think both teams are great. It's another one of those great SEC championship games that anybody can win. And if Alabama beats Georgia, they both might make it. You never know. And I think that'd be great for the SEC again.
Yeah, so true, and it shows that you know your football. The fact that they might be able to get in two SEC teams in a year that was supposed to be a down year for the SEC, it's going to be really interesting, and we can't wait for it. But let's talk about your album, Carolyn's Boy, released October 6th. It's your first solo project in 6 years, and you named it after your mother, who passed away before your music career took off. Talk to me about the album and being back solo.
The Hootie Tour was fun in 19, and making that record was fun. But being out here playing country music is where I really am right now. So that I love it. It's awesome. Carolyn's Boy, we took 6 years to make it, and we took our time. And I'm just so proud of that record. I named it after my mom just because she was so special to me, and she was always my biggest supporter. So I named it after her. But making records is one of my favorite things to do. And when you get them out, you're just happy that people finally get to hear them.
Darius, you know your football, and it's been fun chopping it up with you. So we're SEC championship coming up. I've got to know, Georgia versus Alabama. Who you got and why?
Oh, goodness. I've thought about this game a million times. I got Alabama.
Let's go. Okay.
I got Alabama, and I think I got Alabama just for the controversy of them winning and seeing what happens with the playoffs. That's why I got Alabama.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a team in college football, but I do root for something, and that is chaos. I want chaos every single week, and if Georgia loses to Alabama, that is gonna bring a warm spot to my heart. So I'm right there with you. Roll Tide this weekend. So we can have some chaos. It's going to be a fun game to watch. So, Darius, really appreciate you joining the show.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
You too. Really appreciate Darius once again for joining the show. Really cool dude. He made his pick, Harry, on who he thought was going to win the game. So now it's our turn to make our picks. So, who you got, Bama or Georgia?
I'm going with Georgia. 30 wins in a row. They're finally getting that monkey off their back. They're going to beat Alabama in the SEC championship game. The only thing they haven't conquered yet, they get it done in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
I'm going to have to go with you here, man. My heart says Bama because it's such a fun story. Nick Saban looks like he's having the most fun that he has had coaching this team, which he actually said, by the way. And he's just learning to soak in the moment more. And the coaching job has been incredible, but them dogs is still them dogs. I think they will be able to pull this game out. But I told y'all, I am a fan of chaos. So if chaos can ensue, then let chaos ensue. That is all we have for today, Harry. It was a lot of fun just talking football. Now let's see dudes get on the field. So to everyone out there, thanks for tuning into the SEC Championship Preview Show presented by T-Mobile. Enjoy the game. Peace.